Okay, hello to all of you. Let's discuss chapter number 2. So, in chapter number 2, we're going to talk about a lot of things, and uh, this is basically let's go into slideshow mode. Okay, so basically, chapter number 2 is talking about um, the chemistry of life. So, we are going to talk about of the things what characterize life. Like in the beginning of this chapter, I have posted various videos. I want all of you to watch those videos and see how the life is being explored on Mars. Okay, so basically, so why we're talking about Mars is because Mars is a planet where the life is being explored. It's being checked if some life forms exist there or not, and NASA is doing a lot of research in this direction. So the question is when this research is going on, when the research is done to explore the science of life, what is actually looked for? So the most important thing which is looked for is the presence of water. And second thing is looked for is the organic material. Okay, so water is very important for life. So basically, NASA has sent a lot of rovers to the surface of Mars. There's a Curiosity, Infinity, Opportunity. Various rovers are there, have been there, and what do? They basically click pictures and send the data on Earth, and also uh, they send some. They do the analysis of some rock and soil samples which they collect. So basically, in the rover, there is a machine. So they collect the rock and the soil samples from the surface of Mars, and then they do some kind of analysis, and then they send this data to the Earth. So on the basis of that, the research is going on. So you can see here, it's basically shown here that there are some, some channels and all that um, have been found in these pictures of on the surface of Mars, which shows that maybe there was a presence of water on the Mars. So there are some conflicting reports. NASA has not found yet any signs of liquid water on Mars, but I think there is one Italian company, Italian space agency. They have found some evidence of liquid water on Mars. So like here it shows channel carved by flowing water. So you can see on the surface of Mars there is a kind of a channel which means that maybe in the past there was some water here. Okay, so basically what I just said was like on the surface of the different planets wherever the life is being explored, the most important thing which is checked is if there is water, or if there is the presence of the organic material in the soil and the rock samples there. So this is the way to look for life. So but how do we define life? So the living organisms, life in them, and all the living organisms, they have some important properties, or some there are some characteristics which distinguish the living organisms from the non-living organisms. So this is a table which shows you the some of the important characteristics of living organisms. So all living organisms, they grow, right? So we are all born as a baby, and then we go through different stages. We become infants, toddlers, then adolescent. So so all living organisms, they grow. So all living organisms, they reproduce. So reproduction means all living organisms, they give birth to their same kind. So cats give birth to cats, dogs give birth to dogs, elephants give birth to elephants, humans give birth to humans. So all living organisms maintain homeostasis. So homeostasis means the maintenance of the internal environment. So all living organisms, they respond to stimuli. So Wherever there is a stimuli, the living organisms, they respond to the stimuli. So another important character of living organisms is all living organisms, they need energy. Okay, so all living organisms, they need energy, and that energy comes from the food we eat. So these are some of the important uh, characteristics of the living organisms. But can we actually define life on the basis of these five properties? For example, a mule, which is the offspring of female horse and male donkey, is alive, but it cannot reproduce. So it's a living organism but cannot reproduce. So can we then define life on the basis of these characteristics? Fire grows, reproduces, and uses energy, but it's not alive. So fire grows, reproduces, and uses energy, but it's not alive. So which means that on the basis of these five properties, we cannot define life. So then how to define life? So to define life, we have to go into little chemistry, and we will see that life is composed of same chemical building blocks. Okay, so before we understand that, before we go into the chemistry of life, we need to know some terms. First of all, matter. So matter is something which takes space and has mass. All matter is made of elements. So elements are those substances which cannot be chemically broken down. Like there are various elements, and this shows the periodic table in which all these elements, they are organized, like hydrogen, lithium, helium, boron, beryllium. These are different elements. So the matter is made of elements, and the elements are made of atoms. So every atom has a basic structure. So every atom has a nucleus, and inside the nucleus they have protons and neutrons, and outside the nucleus they have energy shells in which these electrons, they are revolving. So here you can see, this is the basic structure of the atom. So this is the nucleus. In the nucleus they have neutrons, no charge. These are the protons, and in the energy shells, these are the different energy shells. In the energy shells are the electrons which are revolving in these energy shells. So this is all what I explained. So nucleus is the dense core of an atom. Protons are positively charged subatomic particles found in the nucleus of the atom. So these are the protons. Electrons are negatively charged subatomic particles with negligible mass. So in these energy shells are the electrons. Neutrons are electrically uncharged particles, and the neutrons are here in the nucleus. So in any neutral atom, the number of protons and number of electrons are always same. So electrons, they have negative charge, and protons have positive charge. In a neutral atom, number of protons and number of electrons are always same. That is why it's a neutral atom. And how many protons an atom has? Determines the atomic number of that element. Okay, so which means that atomic number is the number of protons an atom has, and number of protons and number of electrons are always same, right? So it means that if you know the atomic number, you know the number of electrons, you also know the number of protons. So this is all information, whatever I'm saying is written here. Okay, so this is the periodic table, and all these elements, they are basically organized or placed according to their atomic number. Okay, so in the periodic table there are various elements, but the most important for us is the carbon, because on the planet Earth the life is carbon based. Okay, so the most predominant element in the living organisms or living cells is the carbon. So it's the fourth most common element in the universe and second most common element in the human body. And these are some of the other elements. These are the other 6 elements that make up the humans. There is oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium and phosphorus. So carbon is a key component of life's molecules. So it has 6 electrons in it, and these electrons, they are distributed as there's a rule called octet rule. On the basis of that rule, 2 electrons go in the first energy shell and 4 electrons go in the second energy shell. So carbon has atomic number 6. The electrons are distributed at 2 and 4. So these elements, when their outermost shell, or which is called the valence shell, is incompletely filled, then these elements, they are unstable and then they try to bond with the other elements. So basically what I'm trying to say, there's a rule called octet rule, and on the basis of that rule the electrons are distributed in different energy shells. So in the first energy shell 2 electrons can go, in the second energy shell the maximum 8 electrons go, and in the third energy shell again 8 electrons can go. So the electrons, they are distributed on the basis of the octet rule. They are distributed 2 in the first energy shell, 8 in the second one and 8 in the third one. So according to the octet rule, if the outermost energy shell, which is called the valence shell, is incompletely filled, if it is incompletely filled, then that atom is unstable. So when the atom is unstable, that atom can become stable if it is completely filled. Suppose an atom has 7 electrons in the outermost shell. For it to become stable, it needs 1 extra electron. Then the last energy shell will have 8 electrons, and then that atom will become stable. So when these when these atoms of these elements, they are unstable, then they try to bond with each other so that they can become stable. So there are different kinds of bondings these atoms can do. They can do ionic bonding or they can do covalent bonding. Ionic bonds are those bonds in which the atoms, they basically lose and gain electrons. So one of the atom gives electrons, another accepts those electrons. So it's a gaining and losing of electrons. Covalent bonds are those bonds in which there is a sharing of electrons. So it means in which these atoms, they share the electrons. So now you can see here, this is carbon. It has 2 electrons in the first energy shell and 4 electrons in the outermost energy shell. And then hydrogen. Hydrogen has only 1 electron, so it's the only single electron in its outermost shell. This is another hydrogen atom. This is the third one. This is the fourth one. So basically, carbon has 2 electrons in its. It has 4 electrons in its second energy shell. So this carbon needs how many more electrons to become stable? This carbon needs 4 more electrons to become stable. So from where does this carbon gets the 4 more electrons? So it can bond with 4 hydrogen atoms. It can bond with 4 hydrogen atoms. So this is carbon. It bonds with this hydrogen, this hydrogen, this hydrogen and this hydrogen. So basically what is happening here is there is a sharing of electrons taking place. So carbon has 4 electrons. So carbon shares 1 electron with this hydrogen, and this hydrogen shares its electron with this carbon. Okay, so this hydrogen becomes fine because this hydrogen can have maximum 2 electrons. So it is getting in this relationship. So this carbon, it shares its 1 electron with this hydrogen, and then it shares this hydrogen, the electron from this hydrogen. So in this arrangement again, the carbon gets one electron from this hydrogen, and this hydrogen gets one electron from the carbon. So hydrogen is all satisfied, is all fine. So same thing this carbon does with this hydrogen, this hydrogen. So carbon needs 4 more electrons and it gets from 4. It needs 4 more electrons and it gets these 4 electrons from 4 hydrogen atoms. So in this kind of arrangement, carbon is satisfied and all the hydrogens are satisfied, and this results in the formation of a compound called methane. Okay, so carbon, so we just discussed about carbon. Carbon is the most versatile element, or it is the most predominant element in the living organisms, in the living cells. Carbon has 6 electrons and they are distributed as 2 and 4, which means the outermost energy shell of carbon needs 4 more electrons. So carbon basically shares its electrons with other atoms and form covalent bonds. Okay, so carbon can form carbon-carbon bonds, or it can form carbon-hydrogen bonds. So the organic molecules, they contain carbon-carbon and carbon-hydrogen bonds. Okay, so the molecules which have carbon-carbon and carbon-hydrogen bonds, they are called organic molecules. And then what are inorganic molecules? Inorganic molecules are those which lack carbon-carbon and carbon-hydrogen bonds. So you can see here, so these are all inorganic molecules. Okay, so here carbon is linking with oxygen. So the inorganic molecule is which is no carbon-carbon or carbon-hydrogen bond. So here is carbon. It is neither bonding with another carbon, it is neither bonding with hydrogen, but it is actually bonding with oxygen. And here is the example of your organic molecules. So the organic molecules contain carbon-carbon and carbon-hydrogen bonds. Okay, so this is, you can see this is carbon-carbon and this is carbon-hydrogen bond. So this is all what we just discussed. I'm going to skip it because it's just a repetition. Okay, now we're going to talk about molecules of life, the macromolecules. So what are macromolecules? Macromolecule word means big molecules. So these macromolecules, they are polymers. Polymers are the ones, the long molecules which are made of monomers. So a polymer is that which is formed by the joining of the monomers. Okay, so monomer is the subunit and polymer is formed by the combining of these subunits or combining of the monomers. So that is why, because it's a polymer, it is made of many monomers linked to each other. So that is why they are also called macromolecules, or the big molecules. So we are going to basically talk about 4 kinds of molecules: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids and nucleic acids. So I'm going to tell you, you need to basically know 2 things. What is the subunit of each biomolecule, and number 2, you need to know the function. So we will be talking about these biomolecules in detail in the upcoming lectures, but for right now you just need to know carbohydrates. They are made of simple sugar. So simple sugar is the component of the carbohydrates. And what's the function? Carbohydrates are basically energy storing molecules. Okay, and carbohydrates can also provide structure support for the cells. Okay, so basically they act as energy storing molecules in many organisms, and other carbohydrates provide structure support for the cells. That's all you need to know. Now next macromolecule is proteins. We'll be talking about these in future in more details, but at this point that much is enough. Proteins is second category of the macromolecules, and its monomer is amino acids. And these proteins, they have various functions. They can act as enzymes, they can actually act as receptors in the cell membrane, they can basically they're part of the cytoskeleton, they help in cell communication, cell signaling. So proteins are very versatile. Next is lipids. Lipids are not made of any repeating monomers. So there are 3 different kinds of lipids. There are triglycerides, there are phospholipids, and third is the cholesterol. So triglycerides, they have a basic structure. They're made of a compound called glycerol with three fatty acids attached to it. That becomes a fat molecule. And these fatty acids, they can be of two kinds. They can be saturated fatty acids or they can be unsaturated fatty acids. Saturated fatty acids are the ones which have single bonds in them, and the unsaturated fatty acids are the ones which have double bonds in them. So if a fat molecule has unsaturated fatty acids in them, then that fat molecule is called unsaturated fat. If the fatty acids are saturated fatty acids, then the fat is going to be saturated fat. So these are triglycerides, and the second category of lipids is phospholipids. Now in the phospholipids, basically, as I just said, it is basically a glycerol molecule. It's basically a glycerol molecule linked with three fatty acids. That's a triglyceride. But the phospholipid is basically glycerol with two fatty acids, and instead of the third fatty acid, there's a phosphate group attached. So that is why they are called phospholipids. And phospholipids, they have non-polar side and the polar side. And third category of lipids is the steroids. So all these hormones and all, so steroids are basically the compounds which have four carbon rings attached to each other. So this is the character of the steroids, and the examples of steroids are cholesterol, estrogen, testosterone. The last category is nucleic acids, and they are the polymers of the repeating subunit called nucleotides. And this is the structure of the nucleotide. So it has basically a pentose sugar, and at 1' end is attached the nitrogenous base, and on the 5' end is attached the phosphate group. And nucleic acids are basically made by the polymerization of these nucleotides. And they basically, what's the function? The function is they store and transmit and execute the genetic instruction, because these DNA and RNA, they are present. DNA is so basically yeah. So they're just made. So this is a nucleotide. Here is the pentose sugar, phosphate group, and nitrogenous base. And nucleic acids are basically the polymers of these nucleotides. And there are two different kinds of nucleic acids. They're called DNA and RNA. Okay, we will talk about these in more detail in future. Okay, next we need to know what are cells. So cells are the basic structure unit of life, and every cell has a plasma membrane which surrounds the cell. And we just talked about the lipids called phospholipids, and the plasma membrane which surrounds the cell is made of phospholipids, and there are various proteins which are embedded in the plasma membrane. And so this is the cytoplasm, and this is the plasma membrane. So this plasma membrane is made of phospholipid bilayer and proteins, and here is the cytoplasm. And in the cytoplasm is basically jelly kind of a material in which all the organelles, they are embedded. Okay, the last topic which we need to talk in this chapter is water. Now water is a very important compound for life. So wherever, as I said, wherever the life is being explored, it is going to be, it is basically seen if the water is there on that planet. So what's so special about water? So first of all, we need to know the structure of water. So water has oxygen and two hydrogens. And hydrogen, as you know, every hydrogen atom has one electron, and oxygen has 8 electrons, and they're distributed as 2 and 6, and every oxygen needs 2 more electrons. And from where does this oxygen gets 2 more electrons? It gets 2 electrons from 2 hydrogens. So this is oxygen, which has 2 electrons in the first energy shell and 6 electrons in the second energy cell, so which means it needs two more electrons, and it gets those two electrons by sharing the electrons with these two hydrogens. Now in the case of water, oxygen is more electronegative as compared to hydrogen, because oxygen has 8 protons in its nucleus, so that is why its nucleus is more positively charged. So when the hydrogen and oxygen, they form a bond here. So when the hydrogen and oxygen form a bond here, so they are sharing one pair of electrons. They're sharing one pair of electrons. So this, because hydrogen and oxygen, they have different electronegativity, this oxygen has a tendency of pulling the electron pair towards itself, and as a result of that, this oxygen gets slight negative charge, and these hydrogen atoms, they get slight positive charge. So basically these kind of bonds which are formed between oxygen and hydrogen, so the bond which is formed between oxygen and hydrogen is because of sharing of electrons. So this bond is a covalent bond, but because there is an unequal sharing of the electrons, the electron cloud move more towards oxygen, and oxygen gets delta negative charge. So delta means slight. Okay, so because oxygen and hydrogen, they have different electronegativity, oxygen is more strong in pulling the electron towards itself because it has more positively charged nucleus. So these electrons, they move more towards oxygen, and as a result of that, this oxygen gets slight negative charge and hydrogen gets slight positive charge. So water is a polar it is a polar compound. Okay, because these bonds, these covalent bonds, are polar bonds. So now because water has a structure like that, it has a V-shaped structure. Hydrogens are positively charged, slight positive charge, and oxygen is slight negative charge, and because of that, these water molecules, they actually bond with each other by another kind of a bonding which is called hydrogen bonds. So inside the molecule of water, which we call intramolecular bonding, the bonds are polar covalent bonds. They're called polar covalent bonds. But they're called polar covalent bonds. But these different water molecules, they're connected to each other by another kind of a bond which are called weak bonds, and they are called hydrogen bonds. So how do these hydrogen bonds are formed? You can see that this is one water molecule. Oxygen is slight negative charge, hydrogen is slight positive charge. This is another water molecule. Here oxygen is slight negative charge, hydrogen is slight positive charge. So this oxygen, which has slight negative charge, can get attracted towards this hydrogen of this molecule, because this hydrogen has slight positive charge, this oxygen has slight negative charge. So this oxygen can get attracted towards this, and they form a bond with each other, and these are very weak bonds. These are called hydrogen bonds. They can break, they keep on breaking, so they're very transitory bonds. So similarly, this hydrogen of this water molecule can get attracted towards the oxygen of this water molecule, and it results in the formation of a weak hydrogen bond. So these all water molecules are hydrogen bonds. So these hydrogen bonds are very weak, but because there are so many water molecules, and they're all connected by these weak hydrogen bonds, the total strength of these hydrogen bonds is a lot. So this is all what I just said. So important thing to know that water is a very, very important molecule which is very important for life. So on the planet Earth, the life exists because of water. So water has many remarkable properties, and all those properties of water are because of hydrogen bonding. So water has the property of cohesion. Cohesion is a property where the molecules of the same kind can link with each other. Adhesion, when the molecules of different kinds can link with each other. So cohesion and adhesion, these are the properties possessed by water, and they are because of hydrogen bonds. So water can so another very, very important property of water is it can exist. So it can exist in a liquid form at a wide range of temperature. So water can exist in solid form, gaseous form, and in the liquid form. So the liquid form, the water can stay in the liquid form over a range, like it freezes at 0 degrees and boils at 100 degrees. So in between this range, the water stays as liquid. Another very important property of water is, when water as a solid form is actually lighter than the liquid form. So usually you must have seen that usually the solids are heavier and they sink to the bottom, right? So anything which is denser is going to sink, anything which is lighter it's going to float. Just look at the case of water. In the water, so you must have seen when you drink some drink and you take the ice cubes, the ice is the solid form of water, but it basically floats. It's a solid form of water, it floats, so it means that it is lighter. So it means that when water attains its solid form, it becomes lighter. So solid form of water is lighter as compared to the liquid form of water, and it is all because of the hydrogen bonding, because when the water becomes ice, it becomes less dense. And why does it become less dense? Because the length of the hydrogen bonds is more in the solid form as compared to the liquid form. So that is why the ice is lighter than the liquid water and it floats. So these are some of the important properties of water. Another very important property of water is a great solvent. We can dissolve a lot of things in water, but we cannot dissolve everything in water. Lipids, they cannot be dissolved in water because water is a polar molecule, lipids are non-polar molecules. So water is a great solvent. We can dissolve a lot of things in water, but everything cannot be dissolved in water. So let's see how do things get dissolved in water. We will be talking about the salts. So you must have seen in your kitchen, like you take a glass of water and you add salt, you just stir it, that salt is going to be dissolving in water. Or you can take a sugar and dissolve it in water, just stir it, the sugar is going to be dissolved in water. So we need to know a few terms: solute, solvent and solution. So solute is something which we dissolve, and solvent is a substance in which we dissolve something. Like in the case of like if you take a pinch of salt and put into water, so water is solvent. It is something in which you are dissolving the solute, and solute is something which you are trying to dissolve. Okay. And once the solute gets dissolved in solvent, it becomes a solution. So now we can see here, as I just talked about, I mentioned about ionic bonds. So we have talked about the covalent bonds already. So carbon forms covalent bonds, and they are formed by the sharing of electrons. Ionic bonds are formed by losing and gaining of the electrons. So here is the example of the sodium. Sodium has 11 electrons. Here is chlorine. Chlorine has 17 electrons. So if we divide sodium's electrons, 11 electrons, 2, 8 and 1, right? And if we divide chlorine's electrons, they are 2, 8 and 7. Now in the case of sodium, it has 2, 8 and 1. In the case of chlorine, it has 2, 8 and 7. So if you can look at the electronic configuration, you can see that sodium has one extra electron, which is creating a problem for sodium. So sodium needs to get rid of this electron. Only then it can become stable. So 2, 8 and 1. So which means the outermost shell has 1 electron. So it means that either sodium can lose that 1 electron to become stable, or it can gain 7 more electrons. Gaining 7 more electrons is a big deal. So basically sodium loses that electron. And to whom it gives that electron? It gives to chlorine, because chlorine 2, 8 and 7, it needs 1 electron. So it's a kind of a bond which is formed between sodium and chlorine. So sodium loses this electron and chlorine gains this electron. So sodium has 11 electrons, chlorine has 17 electrons. But once sodium gives electron to chlorine, it is then with 10 electrons, and chlorine is, once it gets 18 electrons. But remember that in a neutral atom, as I told you earlier, number of electrons and number of protons are always same. So in chlorine, in sodium chloride, which is formed by sodium and chlorine, so sodium had 11 electrons, now it has lost 1 electron, so it has 10 electrons. But remember that in its nucleus it still has 11 protons. Okay, so now the imbalance has taken place. Sodium has 11 protons but 10 electrons, so it is no more an atom now, it has become an ion. Okay, so it has now it is called it actually, because it is losing electron, it has 10 electrons and 11 protons, so it has more positive charge, so this is a positively charged ion. So similarly, chlorine has gained 1 electron, it has now 18 electrons and it has 17 protons, so it has 1 extra negative charge, so this is now negatively charged ion. Because they are ions, they have charges on them, so they get attracted towards each other by electrostatic attractions, and that results in the formation of a bond between them, and those bonds are called ionic bonds. Okay, because these bonds are formed because of the attraction of the oppositely charged ions. Now let's see sodium chloride, which is a compound like this, as I said, which is formed by the sodium losing electron, chlorine gaining electron. Okay, so how does this sodium chloride gets dissolved in water? So basically, you know the structure of water, right? So you know the structure of water is a V-shaped. Oxygen is slightly negative charged, hydrogen is slightly positively charged. So when you take a glass of water, there are a lot of water molecules. So you add the salt to the water. Now the salt, which is this, it's made of ions, sodium and chloride ions. So when these sodium and chloride ions, they get into water, so the chloride ion, because it is negatively charged, it is surrounded by the hydrogens of the water. So you can see here, these are water molecules, and how these hydrogens, they are facing towards the chlorine, because hydrogens are what? Hydrogens are positively charged. Okay, hydrogens are positively charged, so that is why they face towards the chlorine. And the other ion is sodium ion. So sodium ion has positive charge on it. So sodium ion has positive charge on it. So water molecules go and surround this sodium ion, and which side is going to be there? Facing towards the sodium, it will be the oxygen side of the water, which, because it is slight negative charge, is going to face towards the sodium ion. So basically, around both the chloride ions and the sodium ions, these water molecules, they surround them, and they form the shells of hydration, and they basically don't let these sodium and chloride to interact again, and this is the way how sodium chloride gets dissolved in water. Okay, as I've already explained, and I've posted various videos, please watch those videos, so they will make you clearly understand that these research which is going on, the space research, not the space research, all the research on different planets which is going on. So it is basically checked if there are signs of water or the organic matter. So liquid water is not present on the surface of Mars. That has been reported by NASA, but as I said, there's an Italian agency. They have found the evidence of liquid water on Mars. So these are some of the pictures. You can see them. That's all in this chapter. If you have any question, please let me know.